Greetings to all C3RF members and friends across Canada and around the world, and a special welcome to the folks at Veterans for Freedom on their dedicated streaming channels as they view this video summary of the C3RF update for 13 September 2024. The title of this update is Canada's Darkest Hour, and it kicks off by noting similar threats to freedom both in World War II, when Winston Churchill first used the term darkest hour, and current-day Canada as it faces the total loss of free speech. Winston Churchill hallmarked the term in June of 1940 as France fell to Nazi Germany and left Britain as the last Western European domino to fall. In the present day, and considering the status of free speech in Canada, it would not be a stretch to say this country is facing the same darkest hour. What else to think when its long-standing history and tradition of Magna Carta-inspired rights and freedoms stand to be lost with the enactment of Bill 63, the Online Harms Act. The legislation in question has been remarked upon by C3RF patron David Solway as being, and I quote, nothing less than a censorship closely reminiscent of the justice apparatus in authoritarian states like China and North Korea, end quote. He is not alone in this assessment, as other notables, both domestic and international, like Joe Rogan, Elon Musk, Jordan Peterson, Russell Brand, and Margaret Atwood, have likewise chimed in to describe the new law in terms of the lettres de cachet. These letters, once issuable by the King of France, could enforce arbitrary actions and judgments that could not be appealed. It's like Canada has retreated back into the 17th century in the days of the Star Chamber. It's easy to see how the Online Harms Act could give rise to Star Chamber or kangaroo courts in Canada. After all, the legislation calls for the creation of a digital safety commission that can, on the basis of anonymous charges, punish alleged wrongdoers of past and even future acts with fines, house arrest, electronic tagging, or communications bans. Commission appointed investigators to conduct warrantless searches for the Commission to conduct its business without the need to be bound by any legal or technical rules of evidence, and the use of vague definitions of hate speech that will flood the Canadian human rights system with eye-of-the-beholder complaints of offensive discriminatory speech. Such blatant disregard for the most basic tenets of Western judicial philosophy, including innocent until proven guilty, are more than a little remarkable. It might be for this reason that the Act throws a bit of a sweetener into the mix with popular measures that serve to protect against the, quote, sexual abuse of children, intimate images shared without consent, and material that can be used to bully a child or encourage them to commit self-harm, end quote. Notions, nonetheless, that Canadian judicial authorities would not consider as worthy enough to stand alone and apart from the freedom-crushing measures in C-63. Sweetener aside, the legislation represents a bald-faced attack on the charter rights of everyday Canadian citizens. The ability of the Digital Safety Commission, for example, to turn anonymous charges of potential future offences, no less, into serious fines and punishments is a direct assault on the Charter Section 7 right to the right to life, liberty, and security of the person in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. Then there is its ability to demand warrantless searches in direct contravention of Section 8 of the Charter and its protections to be secure from unreasonable search and seizure. When all of these injustices are tied together with a bow in the form of the Commission's capacity to dispense with evidence requirements of Section 1 of the Charter, we can see that anyone entrapped within the net cast by Bill C-63 will find themselves in a very dark place. Indeed, the country as a whole may feel it has descended into its darkest hour as the rights and freedoms that used to underpin its reputation as a Western liberal democracy will have evaporated. David Solway has made note of the darkened depths to which Canada has descended. Indeed, if Bill C-63 passes the House and is ratified by the Senate, Canada would no longer be a country any sensible and freedom-loving individual will consider worth living in, end quote. The rule of law would most certainly be pitched out the window, as the citizen would become utterly dependent on the favor of the government, as he or she was forced through a gauntlet of informers given the power to issue damaging but unverified accusations. And so citizens will be forced to tread on eggshells as they try not to say or do or even think of anything that, in accordance with Bill C-63, is likely to foment hatred, a subjective standard, if ever there was one, and one that is inextricably influenced by the eye of the beholder. Given the pressure that can be brought to bear on everyday citizens by the subjective eye of the beholder strictures associated with Bill C-63, it's easy to see how other charter rights like freedom of religion, assembly, association, and mobility, along with a fair and responsible press, will need to be sacrificed to keep offense at bay. The new Canada that prioritizes the sensibilities of the thin-skinned over the civil liberties of the all is quite a stretch from the nation that had been built up on the tradition of individual sovereignty and the concept of free men as conceptualized in the Magna Carta of 1215. Concepts marvelously captured by John Stuart Mills in his tome On Liberty of 1859, and well suited as an addition to the reading list of any authority involved with enacting Bill C-63. After all, its analysis of the nature and limits of the power which can be legitimately exercised over society, by society over the individual, is one the bill could have benefited from. The framers of the Canadian Charter, like the Honourable Brian Peckford, might have intended for individual sovereignty to be accommodated in the fundamental rights section of the document, but the intention seems to have faded away over time. This vanishing act has been aided and abetted by a judiciary besotted by an ever-flexible concept known as the living tree. This doctrine has proven popular with Canadian courts and paved the way for progressive interpretations to address the realities of modern life. These new realities, eagerly taken up by the political class, have oftentimes distinguished themselves by their rejection of traditional mores and the development of diverse camps which are open to division on the basis of being oppressed or being an oppressor. Conflict and acrimony reign supreme, and the situation is ripe for exploitation by useful idiots and psychopaths. And so, the descent into darkness began. The descent, amazingly, begun on the heels of the patriation of the Charter in 1982, has accelerated since the 2015 investiture of Canada's current Liberal government. The pace could be seen to pick up almost immediately with the passage of Motion M103, Islamophobia. This motion, true to form and in line with the strategy of identifying and dividing people into camps, shamelessly stated that Canada and Canadians were systemically racist and prone to discriminating against whole religions, particularly Islam. Many accusations would follow as the good folk of once strong and free Canada would be labeled as genocidal, anti-vax climate deniers who were in urgent need of being reined in through draconian measures that restricted their ability to express such hateful mutterings. Canada's voyage from strong and free to weak and oppressed has been anything but covert. After all, the darkest hour, as symbolized by the legislating of a speech-crushing Minority Report-style C-63, is the terminus of a long list of charter abuses as chronicled in C3RF's own One-Stop Tyrant Shop. The One-Stop Tyrant Shop exists as a compilation of individual oppressions that have been visited upon everyday Canadians since the inception of C3RF update in September of 2018. The list, based on open sources available to any citizen, is a full 31 pages long and is growing week by week under the nation's Liberal NDP junta. The sheer size of the list brings home the point that our governing authorities have no qualms when it comes to crushing civil liberties, even as the nature of these abuses, including the pre-crime initiative that is within Bill C-63, are aimed at dividing and silencing Canadians under the rubric diversity is our strength. As Canadians navigate through their darkest hour, one thing has become abundantly clear: only they have the power to force their betters to reverse course. As the events of the Wuhan virus pandemic have shown, there is no cavalry coming over the hill to restore our free and democratic society. Indeed, if anything, it is quite apparent that those given this power over Canadians have abused it to place ever more restrictions on speech, as demonstrated by Bill C-63. As Billboard Chris so eloquently stated, politicians don't change the culture, we do. You can join the battle to change our wayward anti-free speech culture by confronting your federally elected representative by phone, email, or best yet, a personal visitation at their constituency office. Here are some thoughts that you might ask your MP to ponder. First, using ill-defined hate speech to bring citizens to task for what they say is a subjective mugs game that stands to be abused by eye of the beholder sensibilities. Allowing anonymous charges to manifest as prohibitive fines, house arrest, electronic tagging, and communications bans is an abuse of your right to security of the person. Allowing charges to advance on the basis of what a person might say or think is truly Orwellian. And lastly, allowing for warrantless searches and seizures is simply a slap in the face to Canada's supreme law in the form of the Charter that is embedded in our Constitution of 1982. Your decision to intervene is critical in turning Canada away from a truly dystopian future for your children and grandchildren. It's worthwhile remembering that although Churchill recognized the nation in its darkest hour, he also, in the same speech, recognized the opportunity to fight back against the forces of darkness and realize the nation's finest hour. In closing, a reminder to join us at CanadianCitizens.org, where you can see this update in its full glory, including all the links to all the cited documents. Simply go to the News tab at the top of the page and select C3RF Member Updates from its drop-down menu. Until next time, this is Russ Cooper signing off, wishing you and yours much happiness and freedom from C3RF.